Good morning and welcome to the Resource Performance Expectations course. It is the first in a series of 4 classes, so thank you very much for being here. I've already gone ahead and pushed record so that you will be able to go back and listen to this presentation later, as well as share it with others in your organization. So thank you very much for being here today. My name is Heidi Carter. I'm one of the lead customer education trainers here at the California ISO in the Stakeholder Engagement and Customer Experience Division. So we're very glad to have you here. I have my producer, Rada Madrigal, who's also with me, that's going to be able to field your questions and keep an eye on the chat. We also have a couple of other subject matter experts that throughout the day they might offer a little bit of insight here and there, and so we'll introduce them when that time comes. So thank you very much for being here. Let's go ahead and move forward through our day. We've got a lot of information and quite a few people on the call. So again, we're very grateful to have you here. So why are we here? The intention of this entire series is really to prepare resource owner operators to effectively manage their resources to maintain market efficiency and grid reliability. So this is timely because we are getting close to summer, but we really wanted to take it even down a notch to just say, all right, what are some of the common issues that we find that the resource owners and operators are needing to understand more so, and how they relate within the context of their scheduling coordinators within the industry at large, so that we can make sure that when we do hit the summer stressors, we run into different contingency events, et cetera, that we have a highly prepared fleet of resource owners and operators who can respond accordingly to, again, make sure that we're maintaining the safety and reliability of the grid. This all requires a partnership to ensure the safety and reliability of the grid, which is going to be always our goal. So you might be like, why do you keep bringing those up? Because there are quite a few changes, as we all are seeing within the industry, that there are so many new resources, batteries being one of them, and that's our class for next week that we'll actually dive more into those. And it's just, creating so much diversity that there's a lot of differences in knowledges and knowledge levels, types of resources, things we don't even understand. Remember a few years back when solar and wind, those were like, what are we going to do with that? We'll never be able to make it work. And now it's like, oh, that's old hat. Now we're moving on to batteries. We're constantly evolving this entire industry, new technologies. So that's kind of why we're focusing more from a resource perspective and figuring out how they tie in. So what are you going to be learning within this course? Where do I fit within the ISO footprint? So we're going to start with the basics, the foundation. For some of you that have been in the industry for a long time, some of this information may seem pretty straightforward, pretty basic, but for others that are new, there's a lot of information. And so we're really trying to level set. And we're going to start by doing that to say, where do you fit within the ISO footprint, and give you an idea of just how valuable and how much impact your resource can have within the system at large. What are the differences between a dispatch instruction and operating instructions? We talked about that last year. For those of you that watched the prerequisite video, you'll see some of the things that we pulled from there, because we're going to just continue to talk about that, drill down a little deeper into that. But we'll talk about what those differences are and how you need to be responding to those. And that ties into resource performance expectations. So what do you need to do as a resource owner or operator to make sure that you're participating well within the ISO footprint, within the guidelines? What are my communication responsibilities? This is something that is kind of gets problematic because not everybody knows who to contact. They may be going to different source, and so let's clarify what those communication paths and how you can take that back into your own shops and really start to work on what your internal paths of communication are, so that we're not overloading certain roles. what are the consequences of not following my instructions? So again, you know, those of you who watched the video, you already have had a taste of this, but it's just reinforcing that there are consequences for not following it, because what we are doing is so important that there really does need to be something that is in place to make sure that that we're all participating well and helping to figure out what those issues are. You know, so it's not intended as punishment. It's really, you know, problem solving so that we're all achieving the same goal. What happens during the different stages of an emergency alerts process? So we'll touch on that. We're going to cover that more in a future session, but we'll get started on that. And we'll also do a slight touch on what would you do if you did get a threat to the grid? What if that's suspected? What are the steps you could take? So that's what we're going to be going through today. Just a little housekeeping for how we're going to run this. Many of you have been in our classes, so this is, you know, familiar to you, but we do ask that in order to minimize background noise, you keep yourself muted during this time. We have left it so that you can unmute yourself. If it gets a little too crazy, we sometimes will have to mute, and then we'll do you know, raise your hand to ask a verbal question. We do ask that if you do have a question or comment that you do raise your hand. Radha's going to be keeping an eye on it. I have a list too. I'm not going to be paying attention to it as much. But if, you know, if there's something that you wanted to say, a question, then we'd ask you to raise your hand during those opportunities for interactivity. And when you do want to ask a verbal question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question. Or you can always use the chat. So if you don't have it open right now, if you could go ahead and open it. We see that there's a few people that have answered the question, you know, who are you? What company do you represent? And what do you hope to gain from this training series? The reason that I asked that question is because this is just starting. We're just starting on this resource, you know, operator training, and we're going to be developing a training program specifically for this. So this is really kind of a foundation that we're setting. So this isn't a one and done class. This is really setting a stage for a whole new learning track that we're going to be developing. And it will also help us enhance the other learning tracks we have for our scheduling coordinators, for our WEIM participants, et cetera. So this is a good opportunity. So we are going to be collecting your questions. We're going to be looking at what are the challenges that you have? What is it that you would like to learn so that we can continue to develop training that's meaningful and useful to you? So don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. Because this is a very large audience, because we have a lot of information to cover, there will be dedicated times for some questions, not necessarily a lot of time to answer questions, but we don't want you to discourage you from asking those, because what's next, like I mentioned before, this training is being recorded. So and these will be posted within 3 days, business days on the Learning Center. And we do ask that you share this. You can go back and watch it, share it with others that maybe are not on this training. And any of the questions that we gather through this course, through the whole series actually, they're going to be collected and turned into a comprehensive Q&A guide. So at the conclusion of all 4 of the training series, we will make sure that all of those questions have been answered, turned into a guide, and that will be posted on our Learning Center. So like I mentioned, this series kicks off the customer education's efforts to create a resource owner-operator training track. So please stay tuned. But we need it to make sure that it's answering the questions you have. So again, don't hesitate to ask those questions, even if we can't get to all of them today. All right, so thanks for some of you that have been throwing your information in the chat. Feel free to continue to do that, because I will be looking at that a little bit later, but let's go ahead and get right into our information. So foundational information, where do you fit into the overall picture? So many of you know, we're balancing the supply and demand. So supply, generation, wind, solar, nuclear, gas, batteries. Batteries are a huge part of that now. So for those of you that are batteries, then you might be like, well, am I generation? Yes, you absolutely are. So when we talk about generation, you fall under that, even though you've got some different attributes, different ways of operating that we'll talk about in next week's class, but you're supplying that energy and becoming more critical to it. And of course, we've got our demand, our customers, our businesses, our homes, hospitals. And so we're always trying to maintain that at that 60 hertz frequency. And that's a very, critical thing to be thinking about, especially when we're starting to see some of the impacts that batteries can have on the frequency and needing to control that so that we maintain that system safety. We also have reserves, ancillary services, which we will talk about that we have for the ISO balancing authority area, as well as resource sufficiency for the WEIM community. And so it's all about also making sure that we have sufficient supplies of generation to be able to meet those changes in demand. So there's a great deal of coordination that needs to be, be happening at all times in order to maintain that reliability. And a lot of it does come down to communication. So, and also, how do you participate with the ISO? So again, we've got our generation, we've got our load serving entities, we've got our balancing authority areas. So, these are our resources, these are our energy users, but in our areas. But all of that, in order to participate with the ISO, with the ISO market, it requires for each one of these to be either a scheduling coordinator or procure the services of a scheduling coordinator. And so that's your main point of contact. So if you are a resource owner and especially if you're bringing it online, it's your scheduling coordinator that you need to be communicating with, because they're the interface with the ISO. So they're the ones putting in bids, they're putting in schedules, et cetera. And so making sure that you have those proper lines of communication and coordination so that you're not skipping straight to the ISO, that you're actually going through the scheduling coordinator, or if you are the scheduling coordinator, of course, then you're going straight to the ISO. But making sure that you have those clear lines of communication and coordinated processes and procedures are going to be critical to making sure that we are operating the grid safely and efficiently. And of course, downstream from there, we've got the ISO working with the local utilities who work with their consumers. So see that this is a long path, but we can't hammer home enough just as we start to go through the rest of these slides to really be considering how you're communicating with these different, with the different parties. So the California ISO, what we're responsible for maintaining that reliability on the grid. And we do that through being the ISO as well as an RC role. We manage the flow of energy. We oversee the transmission planning process, which has become quite robust. And there is a lot of information on that for anyone who's interested. And we operate the wholesale electric market, and we're registered as a NERC entity. So we say this just to make sure that you're understanding kind of the totality of what we do. There's a lot of other the details that are part of that, but also to give you an idea of the regions of where our footprints lie. So we've got the ISO balancing authority area. So we manage the flow of electricity across the high voltage transmission lines for about 80% of California. Also a little bit of Nevada. And then there's the RC West footprint as well. So that's, within WEC, the whole WEC footprint. And you can see there on the map the different customers that we have within the different states. So they're overseeing the bigger picture, making sure that there's no problems with congestion, with any kind of problems that could harm the grid. They're taking a look at that. And we started that role in 2019. Then we've got the WEIM footprint. So that was started in 2014, and we've got over 20 participants. And you can see the different states that are part of that. We've got 2 more that are coming on in 2026. And so this continues to grow, but you start to get an idea, especially if you're a resource owner, that you might have your resource in not too big of a territory here in California, say, but as you're operating, as you're interconnected with the grid, you're touching all of these areas, so you can have an impact. So getting a good understanding of just how big of how big this is, and you know, will start to give you an idea of where you fit within the industry and how you need to be thinking more globally, not just about how your resource operates, but how does it operate within these larger footprints. Apologies, my computer's freezing up just a tad here, so it's either going to take a second or we're going to shoot forward three different screens. Here we go. If it hops forward, I'll move it back here. So this is just some information to kind of give you an idea of just the ISO grid. So that when we talk about the ISO BAA, which is, you know, a little different, the people that are in this operate in the day ahead and real time, but you kind of get to see where our major areas are, and, you know, the major areas, load centers in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego areas. You can see that we still have we're hanging on to that one nuclear power plant. We've got a lot of hydro from the Sierra Nevada, the DC intertie, the geysers. So you can kind of get an idea of what the fleet of resources that we have. We also have a lot of solar and wind in areas that are less populated within California. But we also rely on about, you know, 10 to 30% of imports, and that's going to be dependent on what time of year it is. But based on the evolution of different kind of resources we have, and demand for exports, this is changing. So it's, you know, something that continues to evolve. We do rely mostly for our imports from the Pacific Northwest or the Desert Southwest. So highly interconnected, and we rely on one another. And you know, these efforts of that we have for WEIM, for instance, that's helping us to be able to capitalize further on all the diversity of resources that we have through a larger geographical area. So to continue to, you know, kind of paint this picture, is just to set your mind again on how big the system is, you know, how high the numbers are, and how challenging it can be to control such a dynamic product. So if we, you know, look at this, let's break some of these down a little bit. You can see our solar, wind peak, net imports, the types of renewables we have. And we also had a, you know, peak demand for this, you know, from this resource, or from these statistics, 44,000 megawatts. Now you might be thinking, you know, that's a lot, but I'm only a 1 megawatt resource. And I say only with some air quotes here. If you think of it, one megawatt resource could be the equivalent of 900 houses. So when you start thinking of it in those terms, and you think, oh, if I lose 100 megawatts, you know, multiply that 1 times 100, you know, now we're starting to see how those impacts can happen. And that's why we can't stress enough responsible, you know, management of your resources so critical, because 44,000 is a lot. It's not our highest on record. And depending on the different kinds of seasons, you know, who knows what this year is going to look like. I know that they're still looking at outlooks and studies that are going to come out. You know, we've obviously had a lot more rain, a lot more snow this year here in California. So maybe it'll be a little more mild, but maybe it won't. We don't know what's going to happen, especially as we're interconnected with larger areas that may still, you know, have shortages, drought, drought conditions, et cetera, you know, for example. And so making sure that we have every megawatt accounted for and that you're running those efficiently to be able to hit these numbers is really critical. You also kind of see here on the right-hand side, batteries. You can see just from last year how much it's increasing. So again, this continues to evolve. So that's kind of the overall picture. I'm going to talk very briefly about the commissioning of new the resource testing and performance guides. If you watched the CBT, there's a lot more about this as far as testing and setup, you know, and so I'm just going to kind of high level recap it because on the first, the NRI group, the new resource implementation team, they did a great job. They held a hybrid, you know, in-person and web-based meeting that I know a lot of you attended, where they gave a lot of good information, and so I kind of shortened this up, but just to recap that it all starts with how you set up your resources and how you do the initial testing. So when you're doing that, you know, if you haven't yet set up a resource, you want to make sure that you have proper communication for the resource testing and performance. But you also want to think about how do you maintain that communication for after, when you hand it off, after you've tested, you've been approved, everything's been successful, and you hand the keys to the actual operator. Have you had a handoff? So what are your practices for continued communication? Did you communicate to ensure adequate control of resources? Did you respond to the operating instructions within the required time parameters? And did you have control of the resource at all times? Again, this is something to think about, you know, when you're doing the practice, that's all set up. It's kind of in a, you know, in a nice package. But once that resource goes live, do you have those processes to be able to do this where when the operating procedure or when the operating instruction comes in and you're not ready for it, how do you respond? Do you have operating procedures to be able to handle that within the given time parameters? Do you have control of your resources, either physical or remote? Do you have that at all times so that they can be called upon, that they can be, that they can respond to any operating procedures or operating instructions at all times, 24/7? This is required. During this part, you're also going to want to ensure that you have proper updates for resource testing and availability. So, you know, do you have the right information that has been shared to say that the resource is available? This is also a continuation when you go into actual practice. Are you submitting the right information to let us know, to let the market know? When I say us, I mean the market, to let that market know that that resource is available so it can be part of an optimization process. Are you actively monitoring your resource? That is a requirement during the testing and setup phase, but it's also a requirement after the resource goes live. And so have you identified who's running the resource, who has control? Can you manually place the resource on AGC? And if so, can you take it offline within 10 minutes? This we can't stress enough is who's running the resource. You're going to have some people that are going to be running it during this initial setup, but have you planned for who's running the resource after you go live? Who has that control? Who is it that the scheduling coordinator can contact and say, I need you to do that? You know, who's receiving that operating procedure? I keep saying operating procedure, operating instruction, and responding. You know, who is it that is actually responsible for being able to control that within that time frame, not just the testing, but then how do you make sure that that you can move forward, who's doing that going forward? And does that new person know how to put their resource on the AGC? One of the issues that we run into is during the testing is that you know, whoever's running the test, they know how to put the resource on the AGC, automatic generation control. And then they turn the keys over to somebody else, and they might not be running, you know, they're not running on AGC. And we found that a lot of them don't know how to even turn it on. So it's not like an intentional, it's just not knowing how. So do you have a plan in place to make sure that that the person who's actually going to be controlling it, running that resource, knows how to do it before they actually are doing that? Do you have practice in place to have that accomplished? There are some operating procedures that you can review and see here a list, and that is a lot of, you know, that are in regards to the testing. And so those are good things to have. Now, again, I can't stress this enough. What is your handoff process? Do you have that? If you're somebody that is in charge of setting up these processes, you know, I encourage you to start working with your group and looking at those and making sure that you have a seamless handoff. If you're somebody that's going to be responsible for it, notify those who need to be setting it up. Hey, do we have a process? Ask them. Now, for the new resource, I mentioned that there was a meeting on the 1st, and we just rolled out a resource owners and operators desk reference guide. This guide is an interactive desk reference guide that is available on our Learning Center. It includes I think it's 3 different sections. It has training resources, links to all of our CBTs. It has links to knowledge articles, policies and procedures, as well as the new resource implementation documentation and their processes. So there's a lot of helpful information in there. One of the sections is for SCs, for the scheduling coordinators. The reason why we added this in a resource owner operator guide is because as the resource owner or operator, you really need to know what your operators are, what your SCs are responsible for, what they're on the hook for, from a settlements perspective, from you know, making sure that from a bidding requirement, from outage management, you name it. So the better that you understand how the SC fits and works with the ISO, the better you are as a resource to be able to support that, so that your resource does get picked up, so that it's being run efficiently, and also so that you know how to develop those processes, who to go to answer your questions more quickly, and as opposed to, you know, having to try and find somebody else that can maybe answer the question. So that is available on the ISO Learning Center under the Market and Operations Learning track. Rada also put a link to that in the chat. Forgot to mention as we go along, if there are any helpful links, she will be throwing those into the chat so that you can take those with you. We will be sending out, you know, an email later and add these links for you. But this is a good resource. This is a living document. It will continue to grow because this will be part of the information that we get back from these training sessions. We'll be putting that in here. You can also find this on the new resource implementation webpage. And you can go to this page. It provides you guidance on how to connect your resource, how to get through the testing, who to connect with from the NRI group. They're a great group that is looking to improve their processes, and so they're trying to make that even more helpful. So this is a good resource, and this tool can be found on their webpage as well. So let's take a quick look here and say, where do I fit in within the ISO footprint? And when I say the ISO footprint, I'm not necessarily meaning just the ISO BAA, the 80% of California, but within the markets, within the framework is probably would have been better for this. how do you fit within this framework? So I have a couple of quick questions. So true or false, and you can just throw your answer in the chat. True or false, resource owner operators, they should communicate directly with their scheduling coordinator regarding any kind of system conditions, any kind of resources, any questions. They should go to their scheduling coordinator first. Would that be true or false? All right. Seeing some trues come in. All right. These are too smart, too quick. Yes, absolutely. Can't stress that enough because we do have our generator operators, but you saw the totality of the system that they're overseeing, and so making sure that we have those clear paths is important. True or false? Scheduling coordinators and resource owners/operators should have a plan in place to ensure knowledge transfer between new resource testing through that team and going live. True. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Cannot stress that enough, because I think that there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's just clarity. So having that plan and, again, practicing it before it becomes an issue in real time is going to be key. That is really going to help your staff have more confidence in making sure that they're running their resource efficiently. All right. So before I get into management of resources, I'm going to take a quick break and just kind of look back and see also if there are any questions that have come in from the chat. If you do have a quick question that you want to ask, go ahead and raise your hand, and Rada will call on you. And I see that there was a question about the resource performance rules and standards. Okay. Oh, Jamie, I see yours. I'm looking to gain a better understanding of the ISO resource performance rules and standards for conventional generators as well as hybrids and co-located. So hopefully this will help you. Like we said, we're going to continue to build that out in even more depth. So as you go along, if you have any specific questions about that, throw those in the chat or speak up, and we will be sure to get you your answer, but also build that in because you're not going to be the only one looking to have that understanding. And then, is the new resource training available? I'm not sure if they're going to post. I'll have to check to see if that NRI training was recorded and if it's available. But they do have resources online that they have posted, so we'll be sure to make that you get the list. So, yeah. So I see that we do have a hand raised. So, Sean Patel.
Hi, Shodhan Patel from Constellation. Thank you for providing this training. Um, will the training cover requirements surrounding telemetering failures for resources, just the process from everything from exemption submissions to updating of KISO until the telemetry is restored?
We will touch on that. There'll be other classes where you get more in depth, but in this class we will talk about how you need to inform the market, and how if you do have any kind of telemetry issues, so that you're making sure that the market's aware. So we will talk on that. But if there are deeper questions that you have, after we go forward, because we're going to start talking about the management of resources here. And so we'll get into that somewhat. We'll also talk about, AGC and what happens if you're, if you're not on that, what could possibly happen. But then if you have specific questions, please follow up with those and we'll make sure to get you your answers.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right. see, I think I saw, oops. Okay, perfect. I saw your question in there. So thank you. Oh, and Rada just put in a link to the NRI training material. So thank you very much. And we will, like she said, add that into our follow-up email. But there was a lot of good information about the process, and like I said, great team that would be able to answer those and follow-up questions that you have. So for management of resources, expected response to dispatch and operating instructions. So just to set the stage, some of you who've been in training have seen this and just kind of, as always point out, where you fit in the picture, if you're in the ISO footprint, you're participating in both of these, day ahead and real-time markets. Right now, if you're in WEIM, you're participating in real-time only, though we do have the EDAM initiative that is going to allow WEIM entities to also elect to participate in the extended day-ahead market. So what we're going to be mostly talking about in this are the real-time processes that are happening. And each one of the processes that ever happen within here, we'd just like to point this out because this is not a settlements class, but as you're running your resource, as you're an SC, you always want to think about what is it that could be, that you're doing, how is that going to settle out? Because every transaction within the ISO, for each specific coordinator type, market activity, time frame has a charge code. And so really thinking it through, there are annual, there's month ahead, day ahead, hour ahead, 15-minute breakdown, 5-minute breakdown. And so just being mindful of that there are settlement implications. At the end of the day, reliability trumps, but we do have systems in place to try and make sure that we're running the grid as financially efficient as possible and really tying, the monetary part together with reliability. So just a quick overview on how we have the methodology of choosing which resources to commit. In the day ahead, we have SCUC, the Security Constrained Unit Commitment. And really what we're doing is using that in the day ahead. We're looking at all of the bid curves that we're sending, that were in there, and the market is optimizing all these different resources that are bid in to try and minimize the startup and load costs, bid in energy costs and ancillary services costs. And so it's really more of a financial look at what resources need to be available. So we're trying to maximize economic efficiency. We're looking at congestion at that point and considering any kind of physical constraints. So that's why, again, having the most up-to-date information about the resources helps with this process. So that's happening in the day ahead. From the real-time perspective, we have SCED, which is the Security Constrained Economic Dispatch. And that's an optimization as well. So your resource will be optimized in there along with everybody else. And it's not always just about the cost, because we are looking at reducing the cost of serving the demand through the optimization process, but we're also looking at what is the state of the grid. We're resolving transmission constraints economically, and then also providing that transparency on the constraints and costs. We have that through OASIS. But this is all looking at the 5-minute time frame. So we're, the optimization is going down to that 5-minute, making sure that we're able to meet the demand for the current system conditions. So those are the two optimization processes that we have for the 2 different time frames. And we're just kind of setting the stage with the timing, so you know kind of where this fits. Sometimes I think we just say, real time, and people aren't sure, the real-time market, real-time 5-minute, et cetera. So let's break down some of these real-time milestones. So 75 minutes prior to each trade hour, that's when the bids or base schedules are due for the next operating hour. So that test can be done. That's when we have the hourly, we do market power mitigation. So we're going to look at your resource, and if it has the potential of having any kind of ability to exercise market power because of where it's located, then there is a mitigation process that is used. And all of this is moving to kind of break down, fine tune that flow of electricity, make sure that we're ready for it. Stuck is our short-term unit commitment. It's put here, even though it's really looking back, it's looking about 5 hours ahead into the future for any of those resources that have a little longer startup time. But they're looking for each 15-minute, so it's being optimized against the 15-minute optimizations. And then there's the 15-minute ahead of energy flow. So that's the FMM. So if you're from the market side, you're going to hear it more for the FMM, which is the 15-minute market. RTUC is real-time unit commitment. RTPD, if you're talking to the operators, this is real-time pre-dispatch, but that's looking at every 15 minutes. And this is really looking for, the reason it's there is because of the variable energy resources, because that requires more precision because of their more volatile nature. So that's being looked at that point here. And then we break it down a little bit, that 5-minute, that's the RTD, that's the real-time dispatch. And there's market power mitigation going on in those optimizations at that time. So these are processes that are going on every part of every hour, always never stops, but then as needed, and this will be determined by the system operators at the ISO, it's based on system conditions. And that would be exceptional dispatches and RTCD, which are real-time contingency dispatches. Now, and we'll talk about those here in just a moment. Resources and instructions, they're sent out via ADS. And so we have those again for each 15-minute interval. That's when the dispatch operating points are being sent out. The instructions for starting up, shutting down, or transitioning your unit, depending on what kind of a resource it is. So again, the transitioning for the multi-stage generators, but those are instructions to get you prepared. But then there's another that that optimization happens again for every 5 minutes, and then that's when you're getting these real-time dispatch instructions. But we mentioned those as needed, the real-time contingency dispatch. Those are energy that's sent to respond to grid disturbances or a system emergency. So it's run when there is a significant contingency event, that if we waited for that next 5-minute interval, that 5-minute optimization to happen, that we wouldn't have time for that. So that's when this is run. It produces a 10-minute dispatch, and those dispatch instructions, they override any previously issued instructions that you receive, those real-time economic dispatches. So if you had one, but there's a contingency call, now you're going to have new numbers. So your resource is going to need to respond to these new instructions, and it's looking out at that 10 minutes instead of the 5-minute. For any resources that have ancillary service for spinning or non-spinning reserves that have been designated for that contingency only, those are now made available to the market because, if we're running that contingency, something's wrong, we're going to be pulling from those resources that are available and ready to produce within 10 minutes. And then that energy that's produced as a result of this real-time contingency dispatch settles at the real-time locational marginal price. So throw in little bits about settlements, but for anybody who might be interested. So I'm just kind of looking at a couple of questions that are in here that I can see right away. How often is stuck run? So again, this is it's being optimized within each 15 minutes, but it starts at about a 5-hour ahead look ahead. So it's constantly running and looking ahead because the market is looking ahead, just at different time intervals. So that one just has a little bit further out, but that's always running. But it kind of goes in loop with every 15-minute interval, in 15-minute optimization. ADS screen freezing, Robert, I see that going stale more than you'd like. That I'm not sure if anybody else is experiencing that, but that's definitely one that I would recommend putting in a city ticket, and if you haven't already, and saying this is happening because this is problematic. And as we start to get into talking about operating procedures, you will see that if you're not getting this latest, greatest up-to-date information, and then it could be problematic. But it's also a good kind of thing to think about where, let's say you're looking at your screen and it looks good, and you get a call from, say, the ISO saying that there's a problem, but you're looking at your screen saying, hey, no, it looks good. Really consider that sometimes screens can freeze and have caused quite a bit of issues. So something to consider. And there's a couple more questions there, and actually the next slide real quick, and then we're going to go on a break. Exceptional dispatch, that's also used to prevent situations from impacting system reliability. So these are entered manually by the ISO operator into the real-time market optimization software. They're going to be used to meet reliability requirements for voltage and contingencies. They don't set the LMP, so they don't set pricing. And for those of you that are in the WEIM, you'll know these as manual dispatch, and you do have the capability of actually putting those in as well. In the ISO footprint, those are entered by the ISO Gen Dispatcher. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So if you can come back at 10:01, I ate into your break for 5 minutes. Come back at 10:01, and we will continue on our training. Thanks. Perfect, thanks. And hopefully my screen is still moving here. Let's see. All right. So we were talking about exceptional dispatch before the break, and there was a question about where you would know if there has been an exceptional dispatch. And so thank you very much to Drew Thompson for answering that question. He's one of our generation dispatchers, lead generation dispatchers. We're very glad to have him here today. And as you mentioned, you'll see that in ADS. So there are alarms that would let you know that there has been an exceptional dispatch put in. So I do see a question.
Yes, thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, this is Drew Thompson. I'm a Gen dispatcher here at the California ISO. Greg had a follow-up question in regards to a verbal ED. So you are correct, Greg. There will be a lag time between a verbal ED and your ADS instruction coming into play. As you know, the market is a 5-minute market. So if we give you a call and we give you a verbal ED, the expectation is that we'll give you a set time. So we'll tell you either immediately and we'll state the time. So if I gave you a verbal exceptional dispatch as of right now, I would say immediately at 10:03, you follow this exceptional dispatch, and I'd give you that instruction. So there could be a lag time between the verbal ED and your ADS instruction, but that's to be expected in that verbal kind of context. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Drew. And actually, you made a comment, and so great question and a great reminder that should there be any kind of verbal communications that are there, just like Drew just gave the example, at 10:03, here's what the expectations are, here's what the instructions are. This is when you want to practice three-part communication. So if the generation dispatcher is contacting you and they're giving you an operating procedure, you're going to be expected to practice three-part communication and repeat back what the expectations are for clarification. Again, this will be all on recorded lines, and so it will be for the record, but more importantly, it's just because it's really easy for us not to hear one another and miss some of those details. And so three-part communication is a NERC requirement, but it's also just good practice. Question that just came in, and what would a BESS unit that's not charging from the grid get ED to charge at night from the grid? I don't know if you want to answer that one, Drew, or I'm not sure. I would not think so.
Yeah, I can answer that. So it depends on how you're managing that resource. If you're bidding that resource in based on your pricing and how your energy curve is set, you could be getting a charge signal. You could be getting a discharge signal. An ED, exceptional dispatch, to be clear, is an outside of the market dispatch. So it is outside the normal 5-minute market dispatch. So if there's an exceptional dispatch, that would come either through ADS or verbally through a generation dispatcher. Hopefully that is clear.
Perfect, thank you. Another question came in, or request, might want to give an example of three-part communications. So an example would be, let's say that Drew, called you and said, this is Drew, may ISO, I need you to reduce your output 10 megawatts, and starting at 10:05. And you would say, I hear you say that you need me to reduce my output to 10 megawatts at 10:02. And it's like, no, actually, that's when you have an opportunity to correct, where it's like, no, it should have been 10:05, but it's the repeat back. And then he would acknowledge that, so if you said everything exactly right and said, I acknowledge that I need to back my resource down 10 megawatts, by 10:05, and he would say, yes, that's correct. Now you've kind of closed that loop. You've made sure that each have acknowledged that the message has been shared. So does that help, Mark? All right, perfect, thank you. And when we're talking resource in this context, we are talking about our the generation. So it could be a battery, it could be a solar plant, it could be a hybrid resource. And hybrids can be kind of tricky because the system looks at them as one, even though you're running it in two different ways. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the class next week when we talk about batteries. But that's kind of where we're going with that. So thank you for that question. All right, so what is the role of the ISO generation dispatcher? So you just heard from Drew, and you might have a little more flavor to add on this, but let's kind of talk about what their responsibilities are. So they're looking to mitigate issues. So they're mitigating any kind of issues to system limits throughout that, over 26,000 circuit miles of transmission. So that's one of the big things that they're doing, but they're also balancing the system. So managing that supply to meet the real-time demand. As we mentioned before, serving about, approximately 80% of California demand, plus overseeing a larger footprint as well, as part of the, looking at the whole system. The communication is really the key, and this is where we talked earlier about, what is that clarification of who needs to be contacting who. Because of the system and what they're looking at and the tight time conditions and just the number of resources that are out there, it's really important that we have those clear lines of communication. So from a mitigation standpoint, you know, in managing the transmission, you've got ISO transmission operators. They're the ones that are communicating mainly with our utility participating transmission owners. And then scheduling coordinators are participating with the resources. So then, you know, then those would be, you know, rolling up to the gen dispatcher. But again, there's some clear lines of communication. And then from a managing the balancing portion of it, scheduling coordinators, again, you need to be working with your scheduling coordinators if you're a resource operator, and vice versa. You know, scheduling coordinators, reach out to your operators, your resource operators, and let them know this is what, oh, looks like I just got a note, sorry, that the slide's not changing. Sorry, hang on just one quick second. Let's see, did that make a change to the screen? Yes, it did. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Somehow that got paused. So, so thanks for that. So now you can kind of see where I'm going with the you know, mitigation and balancing. But the scheduling coordinators and resource operators, they need to be talking with one another. And then the reliability coordinator, you know, they're working with the generation dispatcher. So I know that the gen operators, they get a lot of people, you know, whether it be from the testing standpoint or different people trying to troubleshoot the issue. So they're, you know, maybe getting phone calls from the resource operators, the consultants that are helping test, you name it. But it's, you know, kind of think of it this way, you know, they're looking at the entire system, and a lot of the times they're mitigating these issues that are happening that are, you know, right now in real time. And it would be like stopping a fireman saying, oh, excuse me, you know, what would the process for this be? You know, what about me when they're trying to run into that burning house, you know? So there's lines of communication that would be better suited so that you get your answers to your questions more readily. And everybody's in the know, so that you also aren't bypassing a scheduling coordinator and getting, you know, people missing information. And then also that, you know, churns a lot more calls, or, you know, or reaching out. So I don't know, Drew, if you want to kind of hammer home a little point in that, so that, you know, what kind of communications are best for you guys to get, you know, what are the things that maybe are causing some issues, so that you can, you know, get to the job of really maintaining that system reliability.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Yeah, so those are the two biggest points, mitigation and balancing. In those efforts, you know, we could be reaching out to the scheduling coordinator and giving you out of sight the market instructions. We could also be telling you to follow the DOT based on your market instructions. So we're really mitigating two types of things: reliability, congestion, and a lot can be done in those two groups as far as what's happening on the system. But when we call you, the communication is very straightforward. As Heidi mentioned, we use three-part communication. We are telling you when and where the resource needs to be at a certain point in time. And as Heidi kind of alluded to, it's like a firefighter. So when we're calling you, there's typically a reason why we're calling you. There's usually an event happening on the system, whether it be congestion or a reliability event. And if there is any type of questions that you have during that call, it is very important and to basically hash out those expectations. And it is essential when we give you an operating instruction to follow those. So thanks, Heidi.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Drew. And I appreciate you answering questions too. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on to see if any other questions are here, because you know, he's in the thick of it. You know, we're bystanders, but you know, that's just appreciated. You know, that you know, that mindfulness of what they're going through, and so let's see. So we've talked about ADS, and so the GEN dispatchers, they're looking at this. This is where, you would see if an operating instruction was called for, the manual, system ones, nonverbal, you'd also see it in there, but this is where you're monitoring the system. You might have different AIs that you use that overlay, but but we're going to share it from the ISO's, ADS standpoint. Rada just put a link in the chat to the ADS guide. So that provides a lot of good information about the breakdown of the different screens that you're going to want to be looking at. But just from an high-level overview, sorry, I've got this box in the way here. So some of the different places, so you're going to want to, when we talk about actively monitoring the system, this is really what we're talking about, is making sure that you're ensuring that you have situational awareness about the status of the grid and your resource through the data and communications that can be found in ADS. So up in the upper left-hand side, you have the batch status and interval grid. This has current alarms, current active real-time market intervals, dispatch intervals for various resources, and you can also use default filters for that. Next, you have the operations menu and system messages grid. So here you can view the latest system messages that were received. So you're going to want to definitely be keeping an eye on that. Batch received messages, system operating messages from the GEN dispatcher. So you may be getting some messages from Drew when he's on shift, or from the real-time market operator. We haven't really talked about the real-time market operator. We're really focusing more on from a generation standpoint in this class, but the RTMO also will be sending out those messages. So there's also the resource data grid. So that's the main display. This is where we're going to see resource ID specific data. So information about your resources will show there. Drew, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I figure since we're getting questions about EDs and dispatches, I figure I'd chime in on this one on ADS. So in ADS, obviously you'll see your 5-minute dispatch instructions, so your DOTs. In addition to that, you will also see your exceptional dispatches. So you'll see your either a min, fix, and you'll see the megawatt amount. So you'll see that in ADS, as well as you could also receive an operating instruction. So we could be giving an operating instruction that could also be presented through ADS. So we can be doing exceptional dispatches verbally as well as operating instructions, but those instructions could also come from ADS as well. So that ADS is a very essential tool. We communicate through ADS as far as system events as well through messaging. So ADS is a critical communication tool that we utilize to talk with our resources and scheduling coordinators.
Perfect, thank you. And you just mentioned that about that information that you're getting about resource specific in the when you mentioned the DOTs, you've got the trajectory plot for the specified resource. So when we're saying follow your dots, follow your dispatch operating targets, that's where you're going to be looking at that. And then there's that the instruction details grid for specific resource. So when those new updates show up, like he was talking about, you will see new instructions show up. They're going to flash red until they're acknowledged. So there's a lot of good information in there, just like he mentioned. So we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go forward. But this is where we talk about active monitoring. This is a tool that you're going to want to be doing. And then based on what's coming in here, there are some priorities that you want to be thinking about. So Drew, I see your hand up. Was that from before? Did you want to add anything or?
Nope, I apologize. My hand's getting tired. I'll put it down.
No. No, I don't want to miss anything good. So I was like, oh, if you leave it up, you're on the hook. I'm going to keep going on you. So that's good. I have no complaints. So let's talk about prioritizing when you're getting this, because sometimes it can be like, we put everything to you, but what are some of the top things you want to be thinking about? And we've already mentioned operating procedures. When those are issued by the ISO, that those are a priority. When those are received, immediately follow operating instructions when they're issued by the ISO. There's a 10-minute compliance that has to be there. We mentioned 3-part communication. So if it is a verbal that you receive, you'll definitely want to be practicing that. We're going to talk about it here in a moment. If you can't comply, then you need to communicate that as well. So, you have to let us know if it's not available, and you have to be very responsive to it. You can't be like, let me call you back. Let me look into that. It's like, you see that there's a critical time frame, and it's impacting all the other resources like we pointed out earlier on. So decisions have to be made. So being responsive is one of the keys. So immediately following the operating instruction when they're issued. So just for, kind of an example, here's one, an example of a resource not following their dots. So they're not following a set point, and so just kind of a pictorial of what it looks like when you're not. Another one, when they're not following a set point, and so another issue of them not following. But this is what we're trying to avoid. So when you're getting the operating instructions, we don't want to see what those two graphs look like. We want you to respond. We want you to. We need you to. You must respond immediately, because these are emergency instructions. So we talked about it, where can they come out? They might come out through EMS, like Drew just said, might be verbal communication, and they might also come out by ADS, and that's, again, by the operator intervention. They are required to be followed within the given timelines and the ramp requirements unless physically impossible. So we do understand that, as much as we'd like for all the energy to show up and run perfectly, that there are instances when it just can't because of physical, issues. So it doesn't mean that that you're going to be trouble if it can't, but you need to let the market know and let the operator know. I'm going to do you a favor, not read all this to you, but it is really important that you know that this is a blurb from our tariff saying that it's requiring compliance with the dispatch instructions as well as operating instructions. So a little bit about the differences that you'll see for your set points in AGC, that automatic generation control. There are going to be set points that are in there, and set points are a megawatt output target for a participating generator. So the ISO's AGC, that's normally set to send a direct megawatt to the participating. This goes every 4 seconds. So, you know, that's why when we talk about your resource needing to be on AGC, the system is sending out, it's kind of like if your car's on cruise control and it's trying to keep you at that 60 hertz, you know, it's sending out this energy, these instructions, if you will, for regulation for every 4 seconds. If that's not working, then your resource is not able to respond to that. So earlier I mentioned that if you are, when you're kind of handing off, if you're, you know, for that person that's running the resource, that's something you need to know how to do. How do you put your resource on AGC? How do you take your resource off of AGC? You know, what is the procedure for that? And have you practiced so that you're aware of how to do it, so that when you're in an emergency situation where you do get this operating instruction, that's not the first time that you've ever had to try and figure it out, because time is of the essence. And so that's an important thing to have set up. There is a difference between a set point and a base point, and that's the megawatt quantity of regulation service that a unit is provided in a given moment in time. And so, you know, this total regulation for the whole system, that's allocated among all participating regulating units, and base points are not non-economic dispatches. They're called manual base points. Amy, I see your hand is up.
Yes, hi, good morning. I just have a question for the Gen Desk operator about operating instructions coming out through ADS. Is that the preferred method for operating instructions? Is that how we should expect to see them? Or will it be more, or is it normally the verbal where we're doing the three-part communication for an operating instruction?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. So it can be through either ADS or verbal. Depending on the situation, the situation could be so large that we need to get instructions out to a majority of resources very quickly. That would most likely come through ADS. Verbally, we also could be doing that as well. So if you're not following the operating rate instruction, we will be reaching out and seeing what the issue is. But both verbal and ADS operating instructions could be issued. So it's very important, as like I said, active monitoring, like what Heidi's saying, active monitoring and ADS is essential, because the situation could be large scale in which we need to get out information out very quickly to a large scale amount of resources. So you may not have a verbal phone call right away.
So then as a follow-up, if the instruction comes out in ADS and you're not able to comply, you would do the decline or partial accept or whatever, but is that sufficient for you to understand that we're not able to do what you're asking? Or is a verbal expected for the three-part communication on that?
So in the instance which you cannot follow that operating instruction, you would need to give us a call. Most of the time through ADS, the operating instruction that you're going to see is to not to follow your dispatch instruction. You're going to follow your DOT, and we will put a reason in there, either system reliability, congestion, or system emergency. So you'll kind of have an idea of what's going on. If you're not able to follow that instruction, and like I said, typically through ADS, it's going to be a follow DOT operating instruction. Please give us a call if you're not able to follow that dispatch.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. And I see that there's a question, does the ISO provide regulation deployment data to market participants? Drew, I'm not sure if you know that. I'm not sure if I'm getting what they're asking. Bo, maybe you're.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is Bo from NG. Yeah. So because when you talk about the AGC, right, and if you talk about the difference between set point and the base point is the megawatt. Okay, for the regulation service we called, right? But if we are not providing regulation, right, and we don't know the information, right? So on overall, and I want to know, and when the CAISO deploy the regulation, right? So basically convert certain of this regulation to the energy. Does CAISO have this kind of data to publish to the market participant or not? Yeah, because in the recent, like for the battery, right, the ESE initiative, right, so the regulation will be also impact the state of charge, right? So that kind of information will be interesting, right? So right now the CAISO provide like seasonal, right, the attenuation factor, right? But for regulation, right? They change, right? Every 4 seconds they could change, right? So yeah, I'm just wondering, yeah, if Kaiser has more like granularity data be available to the market participants.
Yeah, that's a good question. After the fact, I'm not sure if we have that type of data. I mean, typically in real time, if you're providing, say, for instance, like the example, you're providing a battery resource, you do have a understanding if you're already awarded regulation. So you do have ahead of time know if you bid in for energy or regulation or however you manage that resource, you should know what type of either set point or dispatch instructions you potentially could be getting in the future. After the fact, I'm not sure what kind of data you're looking for. After the fact, we do evaluate which resources are performing on AGC and which ones are not, as far as providing regulation.
Thanks, Drew. And we can dig in a little bit deeper. So, you know, if there's any more specifics that you have, Bo, of kind of like what, you know, what you're looking for, you can feel free to put that in the chat. But that's definitely something that we'll put in our research pile, so we can get more specific information for you. Like Drew said, where we can find that after the fact, and put that in the Q&A guide and respond to you. All right. Looking back, hang on just one quick moment. Just reading the question from Kathleen. Let's see if this is something that, taking a look at it. So Kathleen asked for advanced reporting of unavailability is required for any change in the maximum output capability of at least 10 megawatts or 5% of the value registered in the master file, whichever is greater from the value registered. Yeah, so it's outage management system pursuant to section 9 that lasts for 15 minutes or longer. So if we look at the set point graphs, coupled back, variation on its net, the threshold where the outage card was required, or whether it falls below the threshold. Let's see, we're kind of looking at that right now to see if we can provide an answer for you. I can't take you into that kind of depth, Kathleen, but we're looking at it to see if we can give you an answer. So yeah, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, yes, Heidi, can you hear me? It's Kathleen Colbert from Vistra.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, excellent. And it's fine if you don't have that exact answer. I mostly just wanted to see if we could go back to those slides and look at it again, a little more, just a tad slower, and talk through this, because this is super important, right? We have outage reporting as scheduling coordinators, we have outage reporting obligations, but it's at a certain threshold. Below that threshold, there isn't that outage reporting requirement. So what I'm asking is just to take a step back and think about it intuitively. You're trying to describe what kind of communication you would like from us, and I want to understand. We would normally think that the kind of communication you want is an outage card if it goes over that threshold, right? What I hear you saying is, and there's the instance that your unavailability is lower, so we wouldn't submit that outage ticket. That can happen. Maybe that's resulting in a little bit of the delta. The second thing is if it is above that, we'll submit an outage ticket, but there's a lag once it's approved before it can actually show up in the market, about 37 minutes or so. And so that can be another reason there might be a little bit of a separation from a DOT we receive versus what we can physically respond to. I'm just trying to chunk that out, these two pieces, a lower unavailability versus a lag in the outage that you would be expecting, and how you want us to communicate back in those instances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can take this question, Heidi. So Kathleen, yeah, that's a great question. It is very in-depth. So you're talking two different scenarios. So DOT is basically you're getting a 5-minute dispatch based on the 5-minute market, correct? So AGC, you're talking now, AGC set points are provided by the 15-minute regulation that you bid in. So talking about the regulation piece, if you're not able to follow those AGC set points, our internal systems will actually trigger to show that that resource is not following that 4-second basically set point. We'll get an instance, we'll call the site, the scheduling coordinator, and say, it looks like this resource is having a hard time following set points. If that is the case and the site cannot follow those 4-second set points on AGC providing regulation, an OMS card is needed at that time for zeroing out the AS availability, in which, like you spoke about, kind of like a lag time. Next 15-minute market run will catch that zero availability. Thus, in the future, 45 minutes out, they will not be awarded any more regulation. Does that kind of answer the question about the regulation piece?
Yes, it does. And can I add just a quick follow-up? So in
Yep.
is your preference that, let's say you, we see a set point. We know we have a ticket in, like we submit a ticket, we know it's there, we have a ticket number associated with it. Is the communication you're looking for us to put something in, like for us to call you and notify you with the ticket number? Like, are you looking for something specific in a communication channel or more general?
The responsibility that you have as a scheduling coordinator is to represent your current availability in OMS. So OMS is like your communication to us. If you're currently awarded regulation and you're not following it, and we don't see that OMS card reflecting that availability, then we will be giving you a call.
Yeah, that's helpful. Because
So-
when I heard like when Heidi was describing it, she described it as when we see something in ADS or AGC, we have an obligation to call you. So I just want to confirm the order.
Yes, please
heard you say the
reflect it,
opposite.
and we will look at OMS for your capability if we don't see you following DOT. So DOT is the other piece that you talked about. DOT,
Yep.
You're going to be getting those 5-minute dispatches in ADS. If you can also receive a follow DOT flag, so if you're a VER resource and you are causing congestion, there's a follow DOT flag that could come into play where you need to follow that dispatch instruction. It actually can come into play for any resource, but as you know, the policy is for a resource, it can produce it capable until given a follow DOT flag. So if you're not able to follow that instruction, that DOT availability, that max availability needs to be updated in OMS. We will see if you're not following that DOT, we will give you a call. And basically we're giving you a call because we are looking at OMS and not seeing that availability reflected. So if you're keeping your OMS up to date with your availability, there will be no call.
That's super helpful, Drew. In the instance that, let's say we're being affected by an ambient condition, but it's a very slight one. So let's say that it's we have larger units, so I'm just going to go with the 10 megawatt threshold. Let's say it's at 5 megawatts. So we have a 5 megawatt kind of ambient reduction in this hypothetical scenario. I just want to confirm that you're also on the same page that there is no outage ticket required in that instance, and so there could be a slight delta of unavailability and what you want to see in that instance for communication.
As a generation dispatcher, I would like that you reflect your current availability with your resource in OMS. If there is something like a threshold with policy, that is something that I would request you submit a city ticket and then have them review that. But the expectation of operations is basically you're providing your availability in the OMS so the market can give you the most optimal dispatches.
That's actually really I'm happy to hear you articulate that. I do want to share, since this is a training, that the obligation for scheduling coordinators has a threshold. So if you're looking for a different threshold from an operational need, you will need to work with Tyson Legal and Policy to get the tariff revised to do so. Thanks.
I understand that. I'm not trying to go outside the tariff and legal. I'm just saying you're in charge of the availability of your resource, and in order to reflect that, that needs to be provided in OMS, which market optimizes that availability. That's all I'm stating.
Thanks for the question, and thank you very much, Drew, for the clarification. Really appreciate that. We haven't gotten to the OMS part yet, but I really appreciate you answering that question. That was helpful. And Kathleen will take your information and build that into training examples, so thank you. Here you have an example of an operating instruction. So where you would see it in ADS, you have a note field that would indicate do not exceed the dot. There is going to be a reason that's populated there. The resource obligation to comply within the operation instruction within the 10 minutes, also to be ramping linearly with the dispatch operating target. So that's another important piece. So the acknowledgement is going to show up when that's going to be visible to the first person who looks at it from the first user from the SC. There's going to be a pop-up. That pop-up is going to stay up there until, one time per user, per time horizon of the instruction. So that's going to be remaining up there until that is acknowledged by the operator. So this is an example of what you would see if you're looking at ADS and you got that operating instruction. My computer's wanting to freeze. Sorry about that. So what can you do to make sure that you're getting that information? Because, and I apologize if I misspoke, but it's really, you're going to be looking at this information and you want to be able to see what is being sent out by the gen dispatcher, by the real-time market operator. And so when you're in ADS, exposing a couple of fields and setting that so that you're going to always see these particular columns, that's going to help you with the making sure that you're seeing the information when maybe your resource is not following your dots, your dispatch operating targets. So the ones that you're going to want to have open are the operating instruction start time and end time, the reason for the operating instruction, as well as the flag, and then follow the DOT flag. Also, having the real-time supplemental energy, having that one open is important too. Having these particular ones, these were identified by grid operations as being the most, the ones that would be the best to be taking a look at. And so this will help significantly reduce the length of time that your resource may not be following a dot, because you're going to be able to see that on your ADS. But again, it takes that active monitoring. So what to do? We kind of already have touched on that. Is what do you do if you're unable to follow your dispatch operating target? Maybe not able to follow the operating instruction. This would be the next in the priority of making sure that you are responding to let the operator know what your resource is capable of. As Cody was just saying. I'm sorry, another one. Drew. What Drew was saying is that it's outage cards. That's going to be informing them. So that's a good way of responding to that. We've been mentioning dispatch operating targets. The difference between a dispatch operating target, the dot, and the operating instructions operating instructions are the emergency instructions, where dispatch operating targets are the daily instructions. Those are received via ADS, and resources are expected to perform as instructed for any of the eligible intermittent resources. Those can produce as capable unless they get an operating instruction that would take precedence over those dispatch operating targets. So when should the outages be communicated? So they should be with a physical restriction limits the unit's output, must be submitted regardless of whether it's expected to be long or serious outage. We just talked about some specifics. Like I said, that went a little deeper than you know what we were going to go to in this particular training class, but we will build that out. Thank you again for covering that kind of a little bit earlier. But we did talk about putting in those outages because that's going to inform the market, inform the gen dispatcher. Outages should not be put in for economic reasons. If you just feel like not running your resource because you don't feel like you're going to make enough money on that, that is not a reason for putting in an outage guard. And make sure that once that outage is done, in order for the market to see that, for the gen dispatcher to be able to see that that resource is available, you're going to want to make sure that you fix that outage card, take it out, and as soon as it's available, because the bidding tool is not going to check the resources availability. So you want to make sure that that is that's out there. So outages are treated differently for day ahead versus real time. So just a little bit about the outages for both. And in the day ahead, the outages are planned. After the can't even speak right now. Must be getting kind of close to break time. And so after the outage is planned, end time, the market can add up all that start time to the end of the outage before awarding the unit. But in the real time, the market assumes that the startup time is part of the outage. So if we use this as an example, let's say an outage ends at 6:59 a.m. There's a bid in there for hour ending 8. That's looking at the optimizing for 7 to 8 a.m. The market could dispatch that resource. That's kind of a little bit of the different, the reason for this little difference in how we process that is because in real time, we want to make sure that there are as many resources available as soon as possible. So that's why it's really important if an outage is no longer necessary to go back in and make sure that that's taken out, communicating with your, who's putting in your outage, if it's you, the resource operator, if it's someone from your scheduling coordinator, if you have an outage department, making sure that that is completed, once it's completed, that that's taken out and the status becomes in okay. The market can treat that as it's in, that it's available, and so that's why that would be important. There are outages for both generation and transmission resources, and just kind of taking a look. We also look at planned outages, maintenance outages. For generation, master file provides the market with the information that about all of the information about your resource. Resource availability values are then sent to market systems. They can help set the limits for forward schedules and real-time dispatches, where the transmission, they're running power flow calculations taking into account status of the bulk electric system. So what tool is used to do this? We have the web OMS operating our outage management system. That's the primary method of communicating this kind of information. A lot of customers have maybe a third-party software that provides a different interface, but OMS is, the tool that it talks to. It provides the automated mechanism for parties to communicate the all aspects of the outage information. When we say all aspects, we'll kind of give a little example on a solar resource that when you're putting this in, as much information as possible should be entered for clarity as to why it's not available. So OMS should be used for all physical limitations at the plants. Early submission, the earlier you know about it, the better. That's highly encouraged because we talked about the market optimization timeframes. And so, considering startups or shutdown times, et cetera, you're going to want to have that information in as soon as possible for the most efficient market optimization. Any non-urgent outages, those should be scheduled based on the practice in our outage management business practice manual. Section 8.2 that talks about, you know, the requirements and best practices for those submissions. But again, it comes back to coordination and communication to ensure that the safety of the grid, one grid. So here we have a solar example of the different fields to be considered, and depending on what the reasons are, what kind of information you're going to want to put in there. So obviously your SCID, that's going to be something that's universal. Market resource ID. There's a section for nature of work. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then a short description. So be as detailed as possible. What is the issue that you're having? What is the physical issue that you're having with the resource? And again, that's going to help, you know, just keep everybody informed. From the availability, the VER capability, you've got the availability, that's your Pmax. What is your physical maximum that resource can actually achieve now? What is that limitation if that's what's being limited? If there's issues about regulation up, regulation down, non-spend, there's AS availability. So is this problem causing you to not be able to provide that AS? Then you're going to want to make sure that you enter 0 for the appropriate product if you're not able to actually offer up that AS. Also, if there is some kind of limitation to the minimum, you know, minimum output, that can be adjusted up. So these are fields that you want to consider from a solar example. And depending on what kind of resources you have, and we'll talk about outages more so, especially when it comes to batteries in the next class. But just, you know, when you are considering putting this in, you want to think about the nature of work too. There is a procedure, operating procedure 3220, section 3.3.1, that talks about the nature of work, the different categories. So all of the outages that are put in to the OMS, they need to have this associated nature of work assigned to it. This is the relevant data that's necessary to make sure that we have consistency in the level of information reported. And we can use that, and part of that is because of resource adequacy requirements. That, you know, putting in this nature of work can be a determination for whether or not a resource, an RA resource, will be subjected to the RAIM provisions, the Resource Adequacy Availability Initiative mechanism, incentive mechanism. And so there, you know, if you go to operating procedure 3220, look at that section 3.3.21. 3.3.1, I don't know why I have an extra 2 in there, because break time, I think. But you can also take a look at more information in there. It refers you back to, if you want to get deeper into RAIM provisions, section 40.9 of the tariff, that's going to give you more information. But it is a consideration, but it is something that's very important to put in, because we need to know, you know, why is it? And in the operating procedure, it does give you reasons for it. So we need to be aware of what the actual plant trouble is. So it's time for a break. It is, I've eaten into your break 2 minutes, so let's come back at 11:02. And we will continue on with the next priority, which is to ramp linearly to follow dispatch operating points. So have a nice break, and we'll talk to you in a few. Thanks, welcome back from break. I'm glad you made it back. So we're gonna continue with our prioritization list. We don't have a lot on in this presentation about the ramping linearly, but it is important. I might, you know, call on Drew to offer a little bit more flavor there as well. But something to think about with this is that, again, making sure that your resource can achieve this. SEs, resource owner operators, they need to make sure that they're working together, that as the resource is ramping, that you are there, you're aware, you're monitoring it, and it's able to meet its requirements. So, sorry. So the set point is going to increment linearly from starting point to target, and it's going to be, from a testing standpoint, it's going to be an agreed upon ramp rate. Set points are going to increment every 4 seconds from start to finish, and that resource is expected to actually follow that linearly, follow the instructions when they're received. Now, it's really important that the resource doesn't overstep above what that expected ramp is. It should be a nice, smooth ramp up there, especially during testing, but as well as normal operations. Any default ramp rate should be a controlled value. For the operating limit points, again, they must define the operating band that's suitable for testing or operation. There are some requirements for this in the testing information that we provided, especially in the earlier class that talks about the testing, what this looks like. So you can go back to the NRI guide, the resource operator owner desk reference guide, and it has that information in there as well. Drew, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more about the linear ramping, any kind of importance or how it impacts the generation dispatcher?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that a little bit. So the linear ramp rate, as you know, you're receiving a 5-minute dispatch. We'll put this in 2 parts. So one, you're bid in for energy. So you're receiving a 5-minute DOT dispatch instruction. Between the DOT, that 5-minute dispatch instruction, you have your DOPs, your dispatch operating points. So that is all, your 5-minute dispatch is calculated based on your ramp rates. So whatever your ramp rate is, it will dispatch you to those dispatch targets in a linear fashion. And really what we're trying to point out is batteries, as many of you know, have extremely fast ramp rates. So we've had these resources where they will instantaneously ramp to a 5-minute dispatch. So they're getting a 5-minute dispatch from 0 to 50, rather than utilizing a nice linear ramp, they'll just go 0 to 50 instantaneously. So we really are trying to emphasize the linear ramp rate is needed. The 4-second linear ramping is based on when you're on regulation. So when you're receiving that 4-second dispatch, you know, you're basically utilizing your ramp rate to go to those set points. So we really just are trying to point out that when you're testing your new resource, your new batteries, we're not wanting to do instantaneous 0 to 50 right away. We're expecting that you guys follow a 5-minute ramp rate based on your basically your parameters of your resource. So that's what we are talking about here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Drew. Appreciate that. So continuing on, so that's something that's important to think about, but then also following your dispatch operating target. So we've talked about that. Can't reinforce it enough that you want to make sure that you're following those dispatch operating targets. So again, those are the daily instructions, and they're representing a single point on the dispatch operating point trajectory. So, you know, this is an example of the trajectory plot portion of the ADS screen. Like we mentioned before, you know, this is in ADS. Resources are expected to perform as instructed. Again, for the eligible intermittent resources, those are to produce as capable until they get an operating instruction, unless they get an operating instruction. And these trajectory points are for a specific resource, and they track a selected resource's dispatch operating targets, like I said, as well as the points. So you can see here the blue boxes, those are the dispatch operating targets. Those are the 5 minutes that you're following. the dispatch operating target is, our operating points are represented by the little circle there. So one of the screens that we talked, or one of the columns that we talked about when we looked at ADS before, and some of the ones that you wanted to have open, one of those was the real-time supplemental energy field. So it's one that we recommend to have open. It's a field. This field does treat resources differently. It treats the variable energy resources, treats them differently than it does conventional resources. So for a conventional resource, you have the supplemental energy, or the SUP is the difference between the last dot and the latest dot. So it's looking at that delta, but for VERS, it's looking at their dot minus the forecast. So when the dot is equal to its forecast output, the SUP field will be blank. The VER may produce to its capability, even though that capability may exceed the dot or forecast. But in that case, when the resource is producing at full capacity, it's going to give the market updated production information. That's going to help us result with better forecasts for the future. So when the real-time dot, when it's below the forecast value, there's going to be a negative number that shows up in this field on ADS. But here this is saying, we expect that the resource is not going to. Did we have a question or? It looks like. Christopher, I just put you on mute. I don't know if you're trying to ask a question. It was kind of in and garbled. So if you.
I don't. So I looked at.
Chris, do you have? Oh, looks like we muted you again. Okay. So sorry about that. If you do have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and we can call on you. All right. So for more information about, about this, there is a section in the tariff 34.13.1 that talks about how the ERs must not exceed their dispatch operating targets when that subcomponent of the dispatch instruction is negative. So it's just one of the views to have open, and something to be aware of, and especially how they can be managed differently. Now, ancillary services, we've talked about that for a bit. So just kind of clarifying, because for some people it might still be kind of a little bit of a new concept. So let's just go back up just a tad and go, all right, what is it? What is AS? What are ancillary services? So in addition to procuring energy in the real-time markets, we also procure ancillary services. This is that capacity that needs to be there that we can use to manage stability and reliability of the grid in case there is some kind of a disturbance. So it is used to account for system conditions and those changes. It's a replacement for day-ahead awards that may not end up being available in real time. Say another resource receives an award, they don't show up, we may be able to call on the ancillary services, that backup energy. If there are any changes to the load forecast, replacement of converted capacity, additional requirements in regional areas. So there could be different reasons why we need to call on that. We procure ancillary services through the real-time market as well, and they are procured as contingency-only products. That means that the capacity is only going to be used in the event of a disturbance on the grid. It's not going to be used as supplemental energy unless the energy supply becomes scarce. So there are different kinds of ancillary services. When we're looking at what that is, we've got regulation and contingency reserves. So we've been talking about AGC, about the regulation that every 4 seconds. So that's for regulation up and for down. Those are those constant adjustments that are under the ISO control and through the AGC to, like we said before, like that, kind of like the cruise control on your car, just to kind of keep you up or down, based on the system conditions, just like a cruise control. Road conditions change. Maybe it needs to bump you up a little bit to keep you at that 60 miles an hour or back you down once you're going downhill. It's kind of a similar concept. So that is a form of ancillary service. And then contingency reserves are spinning and non-spinning, those that are either synced or non-synced to the grid, but are able to be up, running, synchronized to the grid, and providing energy within that 10 minutes. So kind of tying together with that real-time contingency dispatch. So those are the types of ancillary services that the market that the ISO is procuring for. So if a resource has an award for AS, it must submit. So if they get the award in daytime, they must submit real-time energy bids for those awards. From a regulation up and down standpoint, for regulation down, they must submit a self-schedule in real time to make sure that they're at the top of the regulation range to bring them down. Does not apply to storage resources. We'll go into that a little deeper when we get into the storage next week for more details on that. From a regulation up standpoint, we can submit a self-schedule or an economic bid for that in real time. If you wanted more information about these AS bids, the real-time energy bids, Section 7.1.6 of the BPM, Market Operations BPM, will provide more of that information. So what are some of the exceptions for ancillary services? This is really, and this comes from the gen dispatchers, what they're looking for and what the expectations are for reliability. So what kind of performance are we looking for from you? We need to make sure that you're able to accomplish certain things, because you do have to get certified to be to provide AS, to be able to bid in there to prove that your resource can actually meet these awards. So in order to provide the regulation, you need to be able to ramp on and off AGC to the dispatch operating point in a linear fashion. So we just talked about that, the linear, and also talked a little bit earlier about making sure that you know how to get your resource on and or off of AGC. You know how to stay on AGC for the entire duration of the ancillary service award and have manual controls in place on the AGC. So again, can't mention that enough, making sure that you have somebody that's available 24/7 to be able to manually control that, whether it's distance-wise or it's somebody there physically operating the resource. You need to have those controls, that you can manually operate that in place. It says in ADS, there's an AGC flag. That's a courtesy feature for the AGC notification, but the resource still has to have the capability to be able to be placed on manual control. There's a note there: do not program your controllers to rely on ADS AGC feature alone. I don't know if Drew, if you wanted to add anything as to why that's important. What could be the problem if they don't, or if they do just rely on the ADS AGC feature alone?
Yeah, as we know, is great, but if automation doesn't always work, we still need to have that backup feature. And this has actually been a feature for a lot of the thermal fleet for decades now, where they are able to, if they don't automatically come on AGC at the top of the regulation award, they're able to manually switch themselves on remote control on AGC. So we're seeing a lot with the, for like the battery energy storage, they're setting the controller to just rely on the ADS feature. So they don't have the manual control that we're looking for. So when we call them, hey, can you please place yourself on AGC? They're having a hard time doing that. So we just want to let everybody know, please have a means in which you can manually control your resource at all times.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Drew. Yes. Also, follow your 4-second set points accurately. That's another, key thing that you need to be able to do to provide the regulation. Show that regulation range reflects accurate capability, and that whatever information you have in the OMS reflects the true capability and availability of the resource. So, we just mentioned at a high level, but that's why making sure that when you're filling out the OMS card, that it is as accurate and specific as possible as to what your resource is actually capable of. A resource cannot be on AGC providing regulation with failed telemetry. So somebody asked earlier about telemetry. If that is failing, then you're not going to be able to be considered for this AS, because OMS metering telemetry card is required with the AS field set to a 0 availability if that's not capable. So what happens if the resource can't perform and unfortunately haven't communicated that they're not available? So, we talked a lot about inform through the OMS card. Maybe sometimes verbal communication is needed, but what about those resources that just haven't communicated those, but your resource is limited? If that does happen, the Gen dispatcher is going to create internal tickets. They're going to flag those resources, letting them know that there is an inability to perform, and they're going to issue one of the following. So there'll be an official letter stating the importance of reliability and adhering to regulatory standards. They're going to request completion of training. There's going to be a detailed root cause analysis that figures out why that resource was not able to perform. Was it a telemetry issue? Was it that it's not being manned properly and there's nobody there monitoring it consistently? What is the issue? They're going to do a root cause to figure out why that is that way, and also to figure out what has been done in order to rectify the situation. There will be potential blocks to prevent AS awards for that resource. So you could be, blocked, removed from the market. And for repeat offenders, we would have to escalate that up to the Department of Market Monitoring to see why that's going on. You can be locked out. There are operating procedures that says you could be locked out for AS, where we do an AS buyback for 30 days, but that or longer if it hasn't been resolved. So that's something to be really mindful of. Once you have that information to resolve, to prove that it's been resolved, you're going to want to submit proof of that resolution through the city application, and that is going to be reviewed by the ISO operations management. Possibly, I'm not sure if Drew, if you Gen dispatchers are a part of that review process as well, but that will have to be done in order for you to be able to start providing AS with your resource again. So there can be serious consequences if there are limitations and you're not informing the market. So real quick, let's get you guys answering. So true or false, operating instructions can be responded to within the first 30 minutes of being received. True or false? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Kathleen's first out the gate. False. I see a lot of falses. Why is it not true? What makes that statement not true? Too long of a time, yes. Yes, 10 minutes is regulation, so yes, 30 minutes, way too long. Is it ever appropriate to say, I'll get back to you, and then just not, you know, let's say you get a verbal operating instruction and you don't, you know, not appropriate at all. Robert Costa, you're right on. Exactly. It's like not appropriate to just say, I'll get back to you, and then not actually respond. So it's very important to be responsive to that. True or false, any limitations that would keep my resource from following a dispatch operating target or an operating instruction requires me to submit a completed outage card via OMS. All right, got a lot of truths. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So now we're going to move on to communication. So thanks for that, for throwing in your answers. We've kind of talked about it. You might think, oh gosh, we've been talking about it a lot, but we can't hammer it home enough. So just to recap, communication is key, and you know, making sure that the scheduling coordinators, you know, we've been talking a lot about the responsibilities of the generators, the resource owners and operators, to be putting in that information. The scheduling coordinators, you're, you know, kind of that go-between. You're the ones that are direct customers with the ISO. You're kind of on the hook. So having that good relationship, reaching out, developing that relationship, those procedural lines of communication for, you know, all the way from the testing process through regular operations, being able to know who you need to contact. So if you have a resource that's in a, you know, way different location, who do you contact? Where do you, who do you contact? Where, you know, where are they located? Where are they, you know, what are the processes for somebody to go and be able to manually run that resource? As a scheduling coordinator, you know, you're the one responsible for helping that. And then resource operators and owners, you're responsible for working together to make sure that you have that cohesion in order to not overload the ISO, in particular the gen dispatchers, who we've been talking about a lot today, but also the real-time market operators. So it really is coordinated efforts that keep the grid safe, keep things running reliably. So what are your communication responsibilities? You know, again, just to, you know, based on what your role is, actually in the chat, a yes or no, do you feel like you have based on your role, do you have the proper lines of communication, like the procedures for communications that you feel are appropriate? So yes for, yeah, we've got it all written, we feel comfortable with it, or hey, we've got some work to do. So no for, you know, we could do a little bit more work. Robert Cliff, yes. All right. Getting a lot of yeses. So we've got the brave folks that have yes. You've got some of those. Anybody who's a question. So Mike's either questioning my question or he's like, I don't know what we have. So Claudia, I see your hand up.
Yes, this is Claudia from Chevron. I had a question regarding testing. If we had a unit that had been out with doing some work, and then we wanted to test it, say for less than an hour, what is the proper channel to do that?
You know what, Drew, would you be able to answer that one? Do they reach out to, who would they reach out to in order for?
Great question. Yeah, if you just give us a scheduling coordinator, give us a verbal call, and we'll coordinate. If we can't do it at that time, we'll coordinate a time in which you can test that site.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
One follow-up, is there any amount of time that we would want to test? Is it 2 hours that we would need to do the scheduling of it?
So you're saying if you wanted to test longer than 2 hours?
Oh, right. Is there a time period that we would need to put the testing ticket in? I mean, I know we'd put a testing ticket in, I should say, to schedule it, self-schedule.
Yeah, correct. So whenever you're doing a unit testing in real time, just put a unit test card, OMS in, put the availability on it, and then kind of what your scope is. But if, like, say you're getting a dispatch right now till noon at 50 megawatts, and you got to shut down at noon, and you need to, like, hey, we need to test something. There's something kind of, we want to test on the unit. If you want to deviate for 15 more minutes and test that resource for additional 15, please reach out to us and kind of let us know the circumstance, and hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you. Great question, Claudia, and thanks for the answer, Drew. I'm not sure about that, Sadam, but we'll check on that question. As far as connecting API to the OMS, I mean, a lot of people use APIs, but I'm not sure on that. But we'll follow up and get you an answer on that one. And if anybody knows and can answer his question, yeah, we got it's doable. So, and if anybody has a quick answer that they want to throw in the chat, that would be great. Thanks. All right. So forging ahead, we're getting to the end, but we wanted to finish up with a couple of things. So what happens when there is failure to comply? So there are enforcements. We've been talking about the requirements, and there are guidelines. There are reliability and safety requirements. So the federal and regulatory standards, rules and stakeholder guides. So we, for the ISO, we've got our tariff, we've got our business practice manuals, we've got our operating procedures that are the step-by-step instructions. Plus we have a lot of other resources that are helpful guides that are more from a best practice. But there is a lot of information that's out there, and it provides guidance, but we're working to make it more clear, and especially by starting this effort of the training. But what are some possible implications of not following? So from a settlement standpoint, there can be economic consequences for deviating from dispatch operating instructions. Like, if there are energy deviations, they're paid or charged at the real-time LMP as uninstructed imbalanced energy. So that can show up in a settlement statement. And ancillary services, for the regulation, any of those deviations could be blocked and then charged back. So there are also regulatory, there are possible reliability penalties that are assessed against the ISO. So those might be, for noncompliance. Therefore, those might be allocated back to the scheduling coordinators for noncompliant. From a regulatory standpoint, there are contractual consequences for failure to comply with dispatch and operating agreements. So, that is something that as part of the onboarding and the testing and preparing, there are contractual agreements that have been put in place. And so you want to make sure that you're operating according to those. scheduling coordinators are required to notify the ISO if there is an event where the resource is unable to comply. And that is consistent with the ISO tariff, the scheduling coordinator agreement, the resource interconnection agreement, and the participating generator agreement. So there are several agreements that are put into place. And then the enforcement of that, there could be a report or referral to FERC, NERC, WEC, or the ISO DMM. And we do want to make sure, we do everything possible, and that's why we're starting to really work on this kind of a training to answer the questions, to bring people's, level set some knowledge, so that hopefully this will, improve the reaction times, the responsiveness, et cetera, so that these kind of things don't have to occur. But those are possible implications. One of the things that the ISO has just put into place is the resource performance issue for resources within the ISO BAA. So this is part of an effort that that our customer experience group has been working on. It's a new process to increase the awareness of resource performance issues. What we'll do is notify the SCs via email if a resource is failing to perform as expected, if they're not performing along with the ISO tariff requirements. If an SC receives one of these, they're responsible for coordinating with the resource owners and the scheduling desks to ensure understanding and corrective actions are being taken. So this is, again, going back to that communication, the coordination of this. So this is an email. You're probably going to want to add this to your processes where, hey, if we get this, what are the steps that we need to take to try and mitigate this and get this cleared up? Some of the categories that are being monitored here are failure to follow your DOT, failure to follow your DOT, failure to ramp in the linear manner, so that is being looked at as well, failure to transition correctly from AGC to the DOT, and also failed to be, oops, and there's an extra O in there, or follow the AGC. So it's a courtesy based on the requirements that we're looking at in order to help resolve some of these issues so that they're not as impactful in real time. And I'll look a note here. I do see, Kathleen, you have your hand up, and we'll do our best to answer it. It's kind of a newer process, so and if it gets too much into policy or those kind of requirements, we might have to take it offline and follow up, but love to hear your question.
Thanks, Heidi. Kathleen from Pittsburgh. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Sorry, those of you, I'm sure. The super practical question, I hope. So we've had some challenges with receiving, with noticing that different parts of the CAISO are kind of using different distribution lists and reaching out to different sets of folks. We do have a scheduling coordinator contact list that we keep up to date. And I know the CAISO customer service team has been working on this, so I hope this is a softball question, but I just wanted to find out, how do we, in advance of, kind of just for quality assurance, in advance of this new process getting kicked off, make sure that this process is using that contact list? Or, yes, that's my question.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see, and maybe I have I know that they have been working on those lists, and like you said, really looking to like for resource owners, creating those lists, getting those updated. So I know that they're working on that, and I'm just kind of looking to see if I have anybody from the customer experience side that would want to maybe speak to that, what you guys are doing with your contact lists now. I know I saw Jimmy on there. I don't know if I've got, let's see. I'm not seeing a lot of my, hey Heidi, this is Lynn.
Heidi?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh. Go ahead, Lynn. Perfect. I was just looking for a name, and if you could, yeah, you could respond just to kind of let Kathleen know what you guys are doing to shore up those contact lists or what they need to do to help. That would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So right now, if I heard the question correctly, not sure if I caught all of it, but right now for this process, the notices are going to primary contacts in our contact list, as well as anybody for a compliance regulation type of contact, point of contact. And so if you or your organization would like to make sure what we have is correct, you can submit a city case to get a current, export, so to speak, of what we have, and you can true those up if you think it's needed. Not sure if that answered your question. I'm sorry if I didn't catch the whole thing.
No, it did. Thank you. It sounds like you are planning to use the SE list, and you're planning to pull the primary and the legal and compliance records, and I assume like regulatory record as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Great.
Appreciate that so much.
Great question, Kathleen, and thank you very much, Lynn. That's good. And like I said, I know just enough from the external to know that they've been really working on those lists, so I appreciate that. So, all right. So, a little bit more about that. Actually, you kind of got to the question. Primary compliance and regulatory contacts will be notified of the new city case. So if this does get created, that's who's going to be notified. Important to monitor and respond to the performance issues in a timely manner. So if you are on one of those lists, you receive that, please make sure that you are responding, because you want this to be resolved as quickly as possible. And the new city list can be found under the reports titled CAISO BAA Resource Performance Issues. So that's where those will be located. Again, your cooperation in maintaining the system reliability is critical, but also very appreciated. So, hopefully this will be seen as a good tool to help, resolve these issues. So, yeah, thank you very much. This is I think it's a good step forward there. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead because we're running kind of a little bit short on time, but really thinking about what are some of the consequences that might come from not following the instructions. Actually, you'll take a moment. You can put in the chat, what could you see would be a potential consequence if you were persistently not following the instructions? Go ahead and throw your thoughts in the chat. Chargebacks, penalties. Great, thanks, Robert. Bad reputation, yeah, we don't want that. You want to have good reputation. ACE issues, yeah. Economical, removal from the market. So things you don't want to have happen, and we want to try, again, we want to be partners in this because, it's a big system that we all need to be working together to keep safe. Outreach from grid ops followed by email, review and discussion could result in training obligations, revoking SC certification or referral. Perfect. Yes, great, Kathleen. All right, so next we're going to talk about, kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about emergency response. So, how does it work? This is just a reminder of, you've got your operating instructions, you've got your dispatch operating targets and instructions, but we've also got, emergency. So what happens, what needs to be done, what kind of notifications are we setting out? So just to kind of review our emergency playbook, a lot of this changed last year. So this is just kind of a high level. There are materials that are out there. But there are operational assessments that are being done. monitoring demand forecast 7 days out. So, you know, there's a look ahead 4 to 7 days out for what kind of system conditions we might be looking at, weather, potential grid impacts, et cetera. Operational coordination with external entities. So we're going to look at the situation and do outreach accordingly, including the governor's office, doing any long start strategic reserves. You know, we'll look at those resource scheduling coordinators and start getting those set up. And considering, you know, what kind of other government agency might be required. We'll also start the public and customer communications. So we might have high temperature heads up. You know, we've got the website, social media that we're sending out. So that's where we're going to start with some public and customer communications. If we start to see that system conditions are looking kind of rough, getting into summer, high heat coming maybe, and it's not looking good for the amount of resources we have available, we're going to start doing some outreach, getting people prepared. 1 to 4 days out, we're going to still do those operational assessments, can't talk anymore, operational coordination with external entities. We're going to look for ways to conserve that energy. What are some efforts to free up additional supply? And there you see here a list of communications that could go out for utilities, water agencies, neighboring BAAs. So, you know, the rest of those that are in the WEIM might be reaching out to you, or even if they're not in the WEIM, but you're neighboring us, that we might do some outreach. Public and customer communications, again, that's where we might start putting out the restricted maintenance operations. We'll be using today's mobile app, M&S, email, today's Outlook, and then DOE orders, governor office proclamation orders, et cetera. So again, just ramping up the communications as we find are appropriate. About 1 day out, again, we're looking at those operational assessments that are reviewing and validating market results, the day ahead market results, looking at the most current information. What are the grid conditions? What is most likely? What kind of resource adequacy do we have available? What are any of the factors, weather, resource availability, outages, maintenance, et cetera, that could have an impact on the grid? And then operational coordination with external entities. So again, do any kind of coordination that we do from an operational standpoint with our neighbors. And neighbors being even within our, within the different footprints that we talked about earlier. And then again, we might start issuing the flex alerts or EEA watch and notices through many means of communication, anywhere from social media to M&S to today's ISO Today mobile app, et cetera. And of course, through our daily briefing. On the day of the operation, we're reviewing actual and potential system conditions, taking actions in accordance with operating procedures. Again, continuing to coordinate with utilities, neighboring BAAs, ELRP board, RC West, and then issuing flex alerts, EEA watches as necessary. And that might be to either ramp up or it could be to de-escalate and provide all clear notices. So, keeping everyone informed. So what are the different levels of our EEA, our emergency alert levels? There's flex alert, restricted maintenance operations, transmission emergency, EEA watch, EEA 1, 2, 3, and up to EEA 3 firm load interruption. So we do use we coordinate voluntary and mandatory load interruption programs as necessary, depending on the situation. So from, if we look at, let's say we're short on energy, if it's affecting the whole system, that's when you're going to get your flex alerts, your EEAs. If it's a transmission emergency, that can, that affects only a particular location based on line flows and equipment. We could have alerts for, either one of those or for both. There's a possibility, but that kind of gives you an idea of the vicinity that we're talking about when we have a flex alert EEA versus a transmission emergency. So just a little more breakdown in these notification levels. If we're looking at what's going on, we've got our AEA watch. Day ahead analysis is being done from a BA standpoint. And you see what's happening for the RC, what's needed, and by when. So when we're looking at the EA watch, we're looking at all generation to be used. What are some additional bids and any incremental dispatch that might be needed? And those are issued in advance, a day ahead by 1500. From an EEA1, and when we're looking at EEA watch, and this is basically what we're always doing, we're making sure that we have contingency reserves anyway, but then we're also making sure that those are being maintained. So that is a consideration, that we always have reserves for the loss of the biggest unit. From an EA1 standpoint, we're looking at available generating capacity. So, BAs, from a BA standpoint, we're doing real-time analysis, and we're, forecasting 1 or more hours energy deficient. If there's available generation in or projected to be used by the RC, we're being prepared to dispatch any DR resources at this point. And this is in real time. So we'll try to do that as early as possible, but it is a real time issue that's being monitored. EA2, we're looking at all available UTC, MSS energy, any DR, interruptible non-firm load dispatched off. We've got the RC is looking at load management procedures. They have those in effect. And what's needed, we're going to be looking to get additional bids, any incremental dispatch, incremental reductions for exports, any emergency assistance that we can possibly get, and evaluate transmission limitations. This is also issued in real time, and we're looking for reserves up, down, forecast changes. When we get to the EEA3, there's 2 levels of the EEA3. There's prepare for potential rotating outages, and then there's the load interruption, so ordering those outages. So at both points, we're looking at was the ARM firm load, and we're looking at as non-spin contingency reserves. The EA3 from a BA standpoint, if we're not able to maintain that, then we might need to go to manual load shedding. We might have to start that process. From an RC standpoint, the BA is unable to maintain, and we've got the firm load interruption is imminent, unable to maintain, and the process that goes into the firm load shed or interruption process. In both of these, we're looking for emergency assistance. So emergency assistance there, but when we get to that EEA3 firm load interruption, we're going to be actually receiving firm load shed operating instructions via blast call. So that's when they're going to be on the call. Those messages will be going out, and those are going to be issued in real time within 10 minutes. So this is when customer load is impacted, what we try to get away from, and why everything that we've been talking about earlier in today is so important, because, when we get to these stress conditions, waiting for somebody to figure out, oh, can I run my resource? Can I make it available? Who's there to actually run it? Is it on agency? Is it, all the things. If those resources are not available, then we're going to have problems, and we don't want to get to this level of the EEA3. So from an EEA3 notification, we're preparing for the potential rotating outages, or else we're ordering those. So there are the details are going to be coming out, for what's happening, what you need to be looking for, you know, and you know, when this information goes out. So. And so once the issue has been resolved, we go back to an EEA 0. The alert's been terminated. There will be a notice that goes out, and then we go back to our normal operations of making sure that we still are maintaining reserves for the loss of the biggest unit. So that's, again, just operating practices. You can subscribe to these by through the document, the ISO communications. There is a link. Rod is going to be putting that in there, and you see the different kinds of messages that come out and where we would actually send those. If you want to be removed from an EA notification distribution list, please submit a city ticket. But if you want to be added, also submit a city ticket, but put in the subject line EA request for addition, and therefore they can go through and make sure that you're getting those notifications. You can also go to our website, sign up for to get flex alerts, etc. But for the EEA3, that does require a city ticket. Here, we're going to be posting this presentation, and you'll be able to find these links that take you further into what are the operating procedures, you know, what are the communication protocols, etc. You can get more information using these links here. So I'm going to skip ahead because we've just got a couple minutes, and I wanted to throw this scenario out there. There's something else to think about. This is something that recently happened. So what happens when you may be receiving a threat at work? Let's say you've got, you receive a voice call, and they're stating that they're from the ISO, they're asking for information, but it seems suspicious to you, and you're thinking, could this possibly be a phishing attempt? You know, it's like not a phishing attempt, but a phishing attempt. What do you do? Who do you notify? How do you verify? What forms need to be filled out, and who's responsible? We've run out of time today, but I'll add this into our next training session. You know, if this happens as a resource operator, it is still your responsibility to say, if you receive a call, let's say from the ISO, and you don't think it's from the ISO, you've checked, it doesn't feel right, then you should put in a DOE Form 417, the U.S. Department of Energy form, and this is how you would report a potential threat. And that's just phishing. That would be something that's like, hey, this would be a good thing to report. It's been logged, it's been shared, it's been a concern. You know, was it somebody just messing around, or is it something worse? So it is something to consider, but filling out this form, you might think, oh, maybe it's not a big deal. But what you're doing when you're filling out this form here is, and there's two parts of it. There's Schedule 1, which is the alert criteria, and then the Schedule 2, the narrative description. You'll want to get this filled out, and even if you don't have a lot of information, get it filled out, get it turned in, get it submitted so it can be run by the you know, the DOE, by possible law enforcement, because it might not seem like a big deal to you, but if it's happening, these other organizations are looking for patterns. And so they might see that, wow, there are 17 different people throughout the industry, 17 different resources that received this call. We've got a potential terrorist threat, or, you know, some kind of an attack to, you know, that's going to threaten the security of the grid. So when you're going through this, fill it out as best you can, make a choice of what the impact, what type of emergency is. Time frame will be dependent. You know, if it's an emergency alert, you'll want to get that in within 1 hour. Again, you might not have all of the information yet, but you want to get it in there because there's a lot of other work that's being done, you know, troubleshooting that, figuring out what the issue is, but you're bringing in more folks in case it's an immediate threat. Normal report, 6 hours. Attempted cyber compromise, 1 calendar day. System report, 1 business day. Update as required, so that, you know, you can go back and update this as you find more information. and the final needs to be in there within 72 hours. So I know that that was very quick, but it's, you know, something to be thinking about. So as a resource operator, if you feel like it's something that could be a potential threat, take a look at that GOE form, look at the different reasons for why these might be submitted, so that when, you know, if hopefully nothing ever happens, but if it does, you know how to act appropriately, where to find the form, make sure that the link is available, and that you're able to fill that out quickly. So just to wrap up, like I said, I think we're out of time, and so we got 2 minutes. So I know I'm rushing a little bit, but you know, at the end of the day, what's really important is that you're ensuring proper setup for resource performance and testing. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Even with this last piece about the threat, communication is key, because everybody has a different piece of the puzzle, and they put that together, we can resolve those issues. But making sure that you've got adequate control of your resources at all times, 24/7, is going to be critical. Registering accurate information in master file from a long-term standpoint, but also putting in outage cards with any kind of temporary physical limitations for your resource. Actively monitoring your resources, that's key. Responding to operating instructions within required time parameters, consistent with tariff requirements. Be ready to respond to emergency notifications. So how could those impact you, those levels? We can go into that a little further in a future class. And then report suspicious activity. You know where that form is, know how to report that, because it's all about maintaining system reliability, as well as market efficiencies as well, because there is the financial, and those two realms have really come together to make sure that we maintain a safe system that is dynamically changing all the time, and we really need to make sure that we're working together to keep those lights on. So please be sure to share this information with your colleagues. The reports will be, or the recording and the training will be posted on our Learning Center. The presentation will be posted later today, and the recording within 3 days. We finished one class, we've got 3 more to go, and so I know that a lot of you have registered for all of them. We'll continue to dig a little deeper in these topics. If you have questions that you would like to see communicated in these classes, please send us a message at customerreadiness@caiso.com so we can respond. I will be looking at your chat, your questions. We'll be putting those into a Q&A guide. We'll also be sending out an email at the end of today with a link to an evaluation. Please fill that out. It helps us to get better and know what you want trained. Thank you so much to Drew. And I saw Brian Stockdale was on here. I didn't call him, but he gave me a lot of great information too. Thank you so much, Lynn and Radha, for being an excellent producer, and for all of you for being here on this call today, your questions, your participation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next week in the battery class. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.